verses entitled The Big Feed on the Grounds, or Feed on the Green, whatever. And this is session number 35 in our series on Mark. Evidently, Jesus is still in Decapolis, the 10 Greek cities on the eastern side of the Jordan. He's still drawing crowds too, perhaps because of the word of his healing of the deaf-mute got around. We're not really sure, but anyhow, there's still a crowd. Let me start in Mark and read the first 3 verses. In those days again, when there was a great multitude, and they had nothing to eat. Sound familiar? He called his disciples and said to them, I feel compassion for the multitude, because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their home, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from a distance. So what do we have? We have a crowd. Is it a Gentile? It's a Gentile land. But since some of them have come from quite a distance, it's entirely possible that there are Jews among them as well. The mix, we don't really know. But again, in this case, we have a crisis that likely happened shortly after the healing of the deaf-mute. Many people with nothing to eat, and we've been there before with the feeding of the 5,000. As a matter of fact, many scholars feel that this is a retelling of that same story. I don't think so, but some do, and we'll talk about that. We don't have any markers to identify the precise time and place of this event, but it was evidently part of this hiatus into Gentile territory, well outside Israel. And again, this sounds like the feeding of the 5,000, but there are a number of differences, and fundamentally that's what I'm going to be doing today, is telling you the differences between the story, the narrative of the feeding of the 5,000 and this particular narrative. In the case of the 5,000, for example, Jesus felt compassion for the crowd. Do you remember why he expressed that concern? Because he said they were like shepherd. Yeah. There we go. They were like sheep without a shepherd. We saw this in Mark 6:34, where Christ made that claim. In the case of the feeding of the 5,000, the people arrived, listened as Jesus taught, ate, and were dispersed all in the same day. In the case of the 5,000, most, if not all, were Jews who walked from somewhere in the vicinity of Capernaum. Remember, some of them ran along the shore as the boat that the 12 and Jesus were in made its way over to the Bethsaida Julia, which was, incidentally, that was also in Gentile territory. It was on the east side of the Jordan where the Jordan entered the Sea of Galilee. And while we don't know the mix of the people in this event, the setting would seemingly apply that most were Gentiles. In this case, the crowd had listened to Jesus for 3 days, perhaps with no food for more than one day. You can look at Matthew beginning in 15:29 and see some of the description. Also, Matthew has a few more words to say. And by the way, Matthew's the only other gospel writer describing this event. Luke and John don't describe it at all. So let's check the event out and see what happened. And we'll continue to see differences between the description here and the description back in Mark 6 of the feeding of the 5,000. As a matter of fact, this place that this feeding occurs could have been very close to the place where the previous feeding was given. It was in the area of Decapolis, Perea, on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. Just how far north this was, we don't know. But let's read Mark 8:4. And his disciples answered him. Remember, in the case of the 5,000, it was the disciples that brought the problem to Jesus. Now, Jesus has brought the problem to the 12, and they're going to respond to him. And his disciples, that's the 12, answered him, Jesus, where will anyone be able to find enough to satisfy these men with bread here in such a desolate place? So they said they didn't even think you could find enough food if you could afford it. In the other case, remember, they said it'd take 8 months' salary. Here they said it just isn't even enough to do the job. And so Jesus, not the 12 here, raises the concern. The concern for a lot of food, the need to have it. And the disciples say, yeah, you're right. Not much around. But the concern of the 12 was the same as it was with the 5,000. Not enough food where they were. And even if they were enough food around to be purchased, they couldn't afford it. And that was in Mark 6, verses 35 and 36. Did you catch the fact that the 12 seemed to have forgotten about the feeding of the 5,000? It couldn't have been more than a couple months earlier, but they don't even seem to have any reference to what Jesus did once. So why didn't they just say to Jesus, if they remembered that, why don't you do like you did with the 5,000 and feed these 4,000 the same way? Were they really that dull and slow of memory? Again, many scholars believe that the answer is no, they couldn't possibly have been that hardened. But because of that belief, they claim this feeding is simply a retelling of the feeding of the 5,000. And it's based upon that one fact that these guys seem to have forgotten completely about the feeding of the 5,000. And they're saying, there's no way they could have done that. Well, that's an assumption. My gut says there are two events, or were two events, and Mark treats them as if they were different miracles performed by Jesus. As a matter of fact, in probably the next session, we'll find Jesus even speaking as if they were two events. That tells me that I might as well assume they were two events. But then Jesus skipped to the inventory just as he did in the case of the 5,000. These cases aren't entirely different. Mark 8:5. And he was asking them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7. Whoops, there's another small difference, right? 7 loaves of bread, little flat cakes, 7 rather than 5 as it was in Mark 6:38. So here they have 2 more loaves of bread. So Jesus organizes the feed again. Verse 6 of chapter 8. And he, Jesus, directed the multitude to sit down on the ground. And taking the 7 loaves, he gave thanks and broke them, and started giving them to his disciples to serve to them, the crowd. And they, the 12, served them to the multitude. What was missing? Think of it. Mark simply states that the crowd was told to sit down. No organization, no groups of 50, no groups of 100, as was the case with the 5,000 in Mark 6:40. So here, there is no indication that the seating was arranged the same as it was in the 550, only that they did sit down to eat. So far, without mention of fishes, right? The inventory included 2 fishes in the 5,000 case. Jesus gave the blessing here to the 7 loaves of bread, and he kept breaking it and giving it to the 12, who kept giving it to the people that were seated. So Jesus blessed the loaves, but so far we haven't seen anything about the fish. And in the case of the 5,000, he blessed both at the same time. Look at Mark 7, though, and we're going to get the fish. They also had a few small fish, and after he had blessed them, he ordered these to be served as well. So the fish were served separately from the bread. They were blessed, broken, and distributed by the 12, separate from the bread cakes, apparently another significant difference. And there were a few small fish rather than 2. In the case of 5,000, they were clearly 2. Here there are a few. You would suspect that means more than 2, but it doesn't say. So, where are we? Well, we're down to verse 8. And they, the crowd, ate and were satisfied. That's the same notion as with the 5,000. And they, the 12, that is, picked up 7 large baskets. These would have been leftovers, right? Full of what was left over of the broken pieces. There's another difficulty. You remember the case of the 5,000? There were 12 baskets full, one for each of the 12. That was in Mark 6:43. But here there are only 7 basketfuls of leftovers. And there's another difference. The term for basket here is different than the term back in Mark 6:43. In Mark 6:43, each of those 12 baskets was a small wicker basket, apparently. That's the term, at least, that's used. And they were just, excuse me, they were just small wicker baskets that Jews, when they were going on a trip of some sort, would take, and it'd have enough food in it for 1 or 2 small meals while they're on the road. But the word for basket here is different. It's a term that implies a larger basket. So instead of 12 small, they have 7 large baskets. And some have felt that the 7 baskets was related to 1 for each of the 7 loaves of bread. I don't know that that's the case. I don't know that it's important. But anyhow, how large were the baskets, these 7? Well, I'm going to show you in Acts. I'm going to read Acts 9, verses 23 through 25. I'm going to read these 3, and in there will be a basket. And this is the word that was used in the feeding of what is the 4,000. Acts 9, beginning in verse 23. And when many days had elapsed, the Jews plotted together to do away with him, and this is Saul of Tarsus. You probably have caught on already. But their plot became known to Saul, and they were also watching the gates during the day and night, so that they might put him to death. But his disciples took him by night and let him down through an opening in the wall, lowering him in a large basket. How big is the basket? Big enough for Saul to get in. So, again, Mark and Luke both use the same word, this time for the 7 baskets, Luke for the one to let Paul over the wall. Each of the large baskets, of course, being big enough to hold, Saul would have held a lot more leftovers than the 12 smaller baskets combined. Again, some people say the 7 baskets, 1 for each loaf of bread. Again, I don't know that that has any truth or any meaning if it were true. We do not know what happened with those leftovers, by the way, because as we'll see as we go along in the next couple sessions, apparently the 12 didn't take the leftovers with them. Perhaps the 4,000 plus split up the leftovers and took the leftovers with them on their return home. We don't know that either. We're just simply not told. So how does this hiatus out of Israel end? Well, it ends in Mark 8, verses 9 and 10. And about 4,000 were there, and he sent them away. So the minute they, evidently quickly after they were fed, and were completely satisfied. And this 4,000 again would have been 4,000 men. They don't know really how many people were there. Some say it could be as high as 16,000. I don't have a clue again. But what happened? Jesus sent the crowd away. Think about back to the 5,000. The first thing he did in the 5,000 was send the disciples, the 12, away in a boat. Here, without any statement about the 12, he disperses the crowd and they return. Verse 10, and immediately he, Jesus, entered the boat with his disciples, with the 12, and came to the district of Dalmanutha, or Muta, depending upon how you feel about the sound there. So what happened here? Christ disperses the crowd. Evidently, there was no attempt in his mind that they were going to try and make him a king. Remember, you're in Gentile territory, so they took the food and ran, apparently. And again, the difference, 4,000 versus 5,000. The crowd is dispersed before the 12 are sent on their way. But not only that, Jesus got in the boat with the 12 rather than sending them back to Israel without him. No walking on the water, no storm is mentioned. The return destination given as Dalmanutha, a city that may also be called Magadan or Magdala, which was the home of Mary Magdalene, still can't say triple digit or syllable words yet very well, sometimes not well at all. But it also may be a town near Magadan and not actually Magadan itself. Matthew gives us a bit of clue to that. Matthew 15:39. Matthew says this, and sending away the multitudes, he, Jesus, got into the boat and came to the region of Magadan. In either case, it will raise terms we have not seen on this hiatus. We haven't seen the term Pharisees and scribes. What a relief that must have been to Jesus to not face that kind of opposition. We don't really see anything of opposition being raised through these last three or so sessions. The in-your-face time is about to be restored, though, as Christ and the 12 return to Israel and opposition. And that's where we'll be next time, folks. We're going to see what happens when Jesus lands. It's going to be a very short stay. Thank you for being here.